So welcome to Awakening Dialogues. My name is Will Pye, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Kristin Kirk. It's a joy to have you here, Kristin. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
When I say here, you're in beautiful Hawaii. I'm in not quite as beautiful Hertfordshire in the UK, so thanks to Zoom for connecting us in this way.
You've sort of got Hawaii kind of designs behind you, though.
Yeah? I don't actually like these curtains. I'm going to like them more now that I've been told that they've got a Hawaii look. I think that's going to frame them rather more positively for me.
Sweet.
Mm-hmm. When we spoke about a topic, we had a sort of two merged. The idea of the conspiracy of awakening appealed to you, I think. And you mentioned also the multidimensional aspects of consciousness, or multidimensional consciousness. And you said a moment ago that these two perhaps go together, suggested that maybe conspiracy of awakening and multidimensional consciousness perhaps sit well as a topic. And I was quite intrigued by that, because I know lots about what the conspiracy of awakening means for me. That sits very on the foreground for me. But I think multidimensional consciousness might be your area of expertise. So I'm hoping that perhaps I'll learn in this dialogue as well. What was it?
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, what was it about the two that felt like a good match?
Well, before I respond to that, I just want to say I was equally curious when you were saying that conspiracy thing is so clear and upfront for you. Like I have no idea what that is for you. So I'm equally like, what's that like for you? So, well, one thing, it was actually during my retreat just the last week. I had just a profound experience, which was also just part of the whole retreat. So this sort of energy came in for everybody. But I was experiencing, and I just want to preface this with, it's sometimes hard for me to find language for this stuff because it's not linear, it's multidimensional, it's all simultaneous, and it is in this massive multiplicity, but it also is singular and has no location at the same time. So all of that is present in this experience. And so when I talk about the parts, they're just like parts of the whole thing. But the reason these two topics are not separate at all for me is that I was experiencing consciousness arising out of source in an outward direction through all the different layers, different dimensions of consciousness, and the direction back to source at the same time. So the movement, the projection out of the sense of self that gets to have an experience, and that inner call, that pull back to source. It's actually one. It looks like two movements, but it's one movement. And that in between our human personal experience of that projection out from source that we're living, in between there are layers of realms of consciousness where we have a sense of self that guides us and pulls us back to source at the same time as we're being projected out as the fingers of God or the experiencers of source. So the whole thing is a simultaneous, unbelievable living truth that we are, and that conspiracy, or the, I would kind of use the words built in, right? It's built into our existence to be guided and called back home. And that inner sense that we have of that inner direction is part of the physics of the whole manifestation, or that magnetic magnetic force, or that pulls us, that we feel directed or compelled to follow, is part of the physics of the whole design, to compel consciousness to move back deeper and deeper into itself through those layers back to source. But we're equally compelled to go out for experience and life and manifestation to happen. So that's why I see them as totally, they're just, it's the same thing.
So I hear there that the whole thing is a setup. It's set up to facilitate awakening, to create that pull and that movement to awakening. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, both. It's both to support awakening, but there's also, I'm seeing like levels of maturity or growth through all those different layers. So some people, they're set at this point to awaken, and other people are set to be focusing on a different part of the exploration of existence, so that it's not, there's no because people can sometimes start comparing themselves when they're in a large group and they're seeing all the different experiences that people are having. And so it's equally important for me in the expressing of this that there's no end goal in a way, and that the whole thing is perfect, and that every experience and every stage and every moment is divinely perfect, and that there does seem to be an evolution in this whole trajectory. And so yes, we're just set timers to make our way back into this bigger truth, the experience of it. But that if that's not where someone is, if that's not what's happening for someone, it doesn't mean that something's wrong or that they're behind or failing or any of that. It's like there's a perfection in all of the manifestations, but that yes, intrinsic to the whole thing, waking up is on that trajectory somewhere. Yeah. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway?
The notion of the conspiracy of awakening and the way that it's set up seems self-evident in my observations. And of course, it's very easy to see this when one looks back at one's life and sees that every single moment led up to moments of insight, moments of awakening, moments of clarity.
Right.
And I think with this notion of conspiracy, I like, because it usually conspiracy is pointing to malevolent intent. And I'm playing with this a little bit and suggesting that there's actually a conspiring for our own good, for our own expansion, for our own awakening. And if I ever hear people express a desire to awaken, then for me, that's awakening. It's inevitable. It's just a matter of time. If there's a desire for truth, a desire for enlightenment, if that's burning strong in the individual, it's just a matter of time, whether it be 5 seconds, 5 years, 50 years, 50 lifetimes, whatever. That's going to burn out, and that's going to express in realization. And I think, I would imagine can you relate to this life conspiring? The people you meet, the connections that happen, this sort of conspiracy of events to facilitate our expansion and awakening and well-being.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I love, like I had said, I was kind of curious, like how you were relating to what you were saying in the beginning. So this feels just like part of that, of looking at, in hindsight, seeing the brilliant design. Mm-hmm. And even in the traumas, the challenges, the health issues, the devastating crises, like all of that in hindsight, right? unless you can look into the whole matrix of why everything's happening, then you can get insight into the perfection of it without having to wait till it's past, right? But if one's looking at the past experience and all that, yeah, it's totally brilliant, a stunningly brilliant, gorgeous design.
I think that shift is what I'm interested in, because as you say, we can look back and see the brilliant design and go, oh, okay, yeah, so that happened, and that, oh, right, wow, that's clever, as it were. And having had that insight, having seen that there is this this function, this purpose, to bring that into the present moment, to ask for the brilliant plan to be revealed now, either as a clarity of this event is teaching me this, or simply as the surrendering of resistance, or the, so it doesn't have to be the plan revealing itself, but rather coming to that place of knowing, coming to that place of this is a conspiring in support of expansion, in support of knowing, remembrance, recognition, awakening, and so on.
Yeah, no, I also, I don't know what words to use. Like trust is an essential component in terms of, I find, in terms of that surrender, and that if the mind can get enough information, so through what you're saying, right, getting enough information through looking at one's life, of seeing the perfection of it and that conspiracy and the setup, then the mind can get on board and be more willing to surrender into the moment and surrender into the truth that isn't about the past or future. Right? It's like the mind and the past or future, right, is like defending itself, protecting itself, or trying to get something, or trying to wake up, or like trying to do something, whatever that is. And that like that moment of recognizing that everything, that we are held, we are loved, it is safe, it is perfect, and we're just time released experiences, time released human capsules that will open to that. Right. I mean, that can totally help people come to that inner place of trusting, right? Which I think is just essential.
Yeah, trust and surrender. They became my watchwords for a large portion of the journey. That they were my practices, so far as or focuses, if you like, again and again. Trust, surrender, trust, surrender.
For me, there was another one in there, which was fierce willingness, because for me, there was a lot of experience that was uncomfortable. And so even though I might not have, so it was harder to trust, right? But because I could see enough in through these layers and dimensions that I could see the perfection of all these things, right? I could see the perfection of getting Lyme disease and being sick for a really long time, or the perfection of, right, having multiple chemical sensitivity and being sick for a long time. So because I could intellectually see that, my mind could understand that it was perfect. When if I didn't have that, I think it would have been much harder for me to see that it was perfect that I was sick for most of my adult life. But this piece, but we can learn from each other's experiences, right? Everyone doesn't have to see through that stuff to have someone say, actually, it's trustworthy.
When you say it's trustworthy, like life itself being trustworthy, or the current circumstances an individual is facing, or is the two the same thing?
The same thing. The same thing. Because it's when things are harder that it's harder to trust, right? And when things feel awful and there's pain, or loss of life or loss of huge parts of one's life due to illness or whatever the circumstance, it's harder to trust. And if people have had lives where there's been a lot of difficulty, one could look back at their lifetime and say, I don't see any conspiracy for awakening. This just looks miserable. Right? So yeah, go ahead.
The fierce willingness is perhaps to take that, to be open to an alternate view, because the capacity for the mind to find the story of self-pity is infinite. You know, I know my mind is well capable of doing this, and yet it's in those moments I've found when the lack of trustworthiness, the lack of evident trustworthiness, it's in those moments of despair and disconnection and challenge and why me, that the greatest breakthroughs, you know, those pressures, if you like, the furnace that those challenges can sometimes create, are often the, you know, again, looking back with hindsight, the times that were actually of greatest polishing or greatest eroding of some of those resistances, or that which would bring me to my knees, you know, literally.
Totally.
So we can choose to get down on our knees and say thank you or help me, or life perhaps will put us.
Right. Yeah, and I think the value of, right, in this case of people like you or me, or having been through something that's been really intense in that way, and then coming out the other side and saying exactly what you just said, right? That in those most miserable, intense moments, that was when the most profound polishing was happening, right? Having that, people don't have to see all these, through these layers of the dimensions, they don't have to see all that perfection to actually get the information that it is trustworthy, right? That the miserable situation is actually trustworthy, and that a deeper surrendering and trusting supports the whole process and supports the polishing, and is part of the conspiracy, right? That's part of the conspiracy.
What comes to mind is that I so often, or my mind is not capable of seeing the perfection, right? My mind would rather there be, or let's say the mind would rather there be a problem here. It would rather there be something incomplete here, rather there be something to suffer from, because then this suffering self can perpetuate itself, can bring itself up, can create itself in opposition to life. And I'm thinking that those moments where we see the perfection, I think for me they are those moments of surrender, where we give up that little suffering story. And so it can be that we need to be taken to that resistance to then have the to see with God's eyes, we could say, rather than with my little perspective set, you know, to really expand that vision. And that you know, the word that comes to mind is grace, which is, again, that's part of that conspiracy. It's like, just when we think we can't take any more, often seems to happen for me.
Right. There's something you said at the beginning of this last little bit that I wanted to add to. You're talking about that place of the suffering, and often I'll see there's two sides, like that there can be a choosing suffering, but there can also be a choosing to end suffering, like where the mind is trying to fix something or trying to make it better, but in its attempts to do that, it's the dual side of the sufferer, and so it's perpetuating the other by trying to create the other. So some people are in that place of wanting to not suffer, and like frustrated. How come I'm still suffering? I keep trying. I keep doing my spiritual stuff. I keep trying. And that efforting in opposition of the suffering supports the sustaining of both of those.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that surrendering of them into each other, the one trying to fix the suffering or stop the suffering into the suffering itself. It's like in that surrender into each other, that collapse happens into that deeper truth and that grace that you are speaking about. I just wanted to, I mean, so often I hear from people, right? Like the efforts to not suffer. And, right. So it was just like the other side of the part that you were saying, right? These two parts that kind of go in tandem. I just wanted to address that part, but the end result of what you're saying of the resting and the surrendering it all and coming into grace, right? Yeah, totally. That's what happens, right? It's so beautiful, and I love in your expressing of that, right? Like the grace, that grace just started shining, like totally out of your being, you know.
The ending of that resistance that you're speaking of, you know, when the mind wants to end the suffering, so it pushes it away. The word that comes to mind when I hear that, I think of resistance.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's an unwillingness to feel what wants to be felt or accept what is. And in my I have this idea of radical gratitude, which is to actually say thank you, literally to say thank you to those times of darkness, to say thank you to those times of challenge. And I recently, anything that I share or teach or point to, I'm learning and exploring myself. And I was on a hospital trolley recently. I'd been taken to ER. You know a little bit of this, Kristin, from chats and from Facebook, and the I had this pounding headache, and it didn't look particularly good. The doctor said he was worried and all the rest, and I noticed that there was some resistance to what was happening. It was really inconvenient. I felt either emergency brain surgery or death. Both seemed like really crap for my schedule right now, and
right. Totally inconvenient.
Yeah, like really bad timing. And then there was this moment of just like looking at it all, as it were, like really just sort of allowing a clarity on all the circumstances that were presented, and saying thank you, because it was, and it was a moment of grace, as any thank you is, you know, any thank you. I love this Meister Eckhart idea that if you have one prayer ever, and just say thank you, and that's it, that's enough. That's your spiritual work done. You know, a really sincere thank you.
That's gorgeous.
Isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah. So I find that a helpful remembering or reminding you this idea of the conspiracy of awakening, that the setup, that that there is a yearning at the core of consciousness itself. There is a yearning in consciousness itself, we could say, to know itself, to realize itself, to experience its own expansion, and that includes expanding wherever it wants to expand. Right? We don't get to choose the pathways. Much of this seems to have been pre-selected for us there.
Well, this is where the multi-dimensional part comes in, because it's all the self.
Mm-hmm.
It's all oneself, mm-hmm. Right? And that the way that I experience it is through all these layers. There's an organization of the experience of the sense of self, and that there is choosing, there is actual choice. But as human beings, we're at the bottom of the line. Right, we're at the bottom of the line, right? If you open up to your soul consciousness is orchestrating multiple lifetime experiences for a learning that each of those individual lifetime experiences is part of.
See, that resonates, and at the same time, I don't experience the making a choice of. So, for example, the brain tumor diagnosis, like it doesn't offend me in any way to hear that I chose that. That kind of makes sense completely. Mm-hmm. And yet I don't have any access in my awareness to that choice being made. It just sort of resonates as being true. So it seems that there's very different types of choice that we make. Mm-hmm. And, on the one hand, it might be helpful for me to ponder or contemplate how I chose that experience. And I have found it to be helpful to look at it that way. Mm-hmm. And yet to say to someone else, it might be less helpful to suggest that they had chosen their more challenging experiences in life. I wonder how you approach that.
Well, it's everything's always shared in the moment, right? So if it's not useful, that probably wouldn't be what comes out of my mouth. Mm-hmm. But if someone doesn't have access to that aspect of themselves, then that part of them would have, how can I say this? Let me just be quiet for a second. Right, it's only useful if it's useful. And that in that deep core, like in the beginning of our sharing, when I was talking about all these layers of self, that it's one self, but it's set up in this whole magnificent, manifestation, calling itself home. Mm-hmm. And that from a deeper perspective than most people have of their current life, from a deeper perspective in themselves, of themselves, there was a larger understanding of what was the best way to come home, what is the best way for polishing. And so it's from a deeper perspective that one would choose a situation. So it gets into a much larger topic, just because of the level of compassion that also comes from these larger perspectives. But because it's still all the self, you still don't have to know all that information or be connected with choosing or any of that, because the truth is also profoundly simple. And I'll just say one last thing. I love your thing about in the midst of in the midst of any uncomfortable situation, to say thank you helps bring one back into the simplicity of the gorgeousness that's happening, whether we understand it or not.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to have been a hindrance to not be aware of this level of choice. It's just kind of like, okay, yeah, I can see how this life has been set up in a way that's wonderfully supportive of my expansion and awakening. And I can see how, at critical times, the temperature has been raised, and I can see the function and the purpose of the suffering. With hindsight, and increasingly as things arise, it's like, oh, okay, yeah. And part of what I share with people is the questions that we can ask that might bring that insight forth in the moment. So not just with the hindsight, but in the moment of the fire or the challenge. So I think I find it really intriguing that these clarities and views and aspects are available to people. It's such a delicious variety, a smorgasbord of souls' journeys or human experiences that are available to us.
Right.
And I think just the awakening, just the conspiracy of awakening, that's known to be deeply true. That's known to be deeply true. It was a belief for a while that I believed everything was facilitating growth and learning, and thus it became so, because of course we tend to experience what we strongly believe.
Right. And
in the realization, it became something other than a belief. It became not so much an overlay upon reality, as it were, but an insight that life had offered up. That, yeah, this is actually all play. It's all part of your expansion.
Right.
Hallelujah. Yeah, hallelujah.
Yeah, and I also want to just acknowledge how hard it can be.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, I'm not in those deep places that I was in for many years. You know, the chemical sensitivity and the Lyme disease were worked through, so that they're not present anymore. But so I also just want to acknowledge that too. Like, in a certain way, it's easy to say in hindsight. Although you were just in the ER, so that's not so not so far away.
I was going to say to you as well. Yeah, for me, there's an aliveness, and I'm still processing and integrating all that's come up in the last few days. So I think that's a really valuable reminder.
Right.
Wherever whatever roles we may be playing, wherever we're at on the journey, life happens and shit happens, pain happens.
Right.
Yeah, my dear friend Jumpo, he's a wonderful teacher and gone through his stage 4 cancer and then Parkinson. He's thriving with Parkinson's, and then he's got to have a neck surgery, and you know, it's just that's astonishing, the level of intensity that life can continue to present.
Right.
And you use the word compassion. I think this is so important. Yeah,
compassion for the polishing, because the polishing can be painful.
Yeah, and to invite the spiritual superhero and at the same time love and accept the more human parts of ourselves that are, you know, on that edge of expansion or on that edge of learning, and might just need a hug rather than a reminder of our infinite power, you know.
Right. The other piece too, and I'm only saying this because of what it brings up in me in terms of my own path, like that spiritual superhero can carry one through some of the challenging parts. But in my experience, that spiritual superhero also has to surrender itself, because that's also just another expression of the divine. And that surrendering, how do I say this? Like, something about the pain, like I was saying, like the compassion because the polishing can be painful, and that it's not just like riding above the pain, like that can be really helpful. But in terms of awakening, for me, that it was a surrendering through the pain. It was a surrendering into the truth of the being ripped apart. Mm-hmm. Like that agony is what actually rips open into a deeper truth. So, and that's where that fierce willingness came in for me, because the fierce willingness was then used by the superhero, used by the super spiritual hero to bear the pain. Mm-hmm. And surrender the whole thing, the pain, the surrendering, the fierce willingness, and the superhero, right? Mm-hmm. All those aspects of the divine, they're all just aspects of divine manifestation. And so to surrender all of those into themselves can then collapse through into the truth from which all that arises out of.
And I think what I hear from this allows the light to have been, when the light is found in the greatest darkness, when that meaning is found on the other side of the greatest meaninglessness, you know, there's something far more precious and valuable, and you know, it's like the light at the end of the tunnel, or the first food we've had after being hungry for weeks. You know, there's something far more visceral and real and sweet. I know, indeed, in my experience, it was after, or part of the process of awakening, integrating, was going back to the suicidal despair, going back to this most dark place, this place of great disconnect and despair, and having that experience from a different level or a different part of me. So all that same material arising, and having the experience of, or as consciousness, having this experience as Will Pye, having this experience of apparent horror. And it just, in that moment, there was this like, oh, wow, yeah, this is love too. This is beautiful too. This is light. This is expansion. It's okay even here. There's something okay even here. And yeah, quite a subtle plot of the conspiracy, or a very well written part of that conspiracy. Mm-hmm. To go into that challenge and that difficulty.
Yeah. Were you about to say? I was going to respond to that, but go ahead if you're going to.
No, please respond away.
Oh. Well, I just wanted to share, like, my relationship to that experience of that kind of despair. Mm-hmm. When I was sitting with that, I mean, what I love about your sharing, it's like we're each so unique, right? Like, people can have a similar outward experience, but how that unfolds into light and truth on the inside is going to be unique. So I'm totally loving hearing like, wow, that's what happened for you, when that was going on, when I was having a similar experience in my surrendering through, I'll often try to come down to, like, what has the most grip on me, like, what's the most intense piece of this, and that's what I'll aim for. The spiritual warrior will then choose fierce willingness and aim for that point that it has found, that's the most awful, that's the most intense. And then that's where consciousness will then choose to surrender into and collapse through. And what that was for me was this feeling of excruciating. Like, there was this quality of excruciating and unbearable. And the mind then interprets that as, I can't take this anymore. I need to die. I need to kill myself or whatever. Mm-hmm. But that the emotional nugget that was where the contraction was stuck, right? Because then the beliefs happened, the ideas kind of like bubbled out of that, was that sense of excruciating and unbearable. And in my surrendering through that moment, what revealed itself was laughter, in that right, it's like, oh, that's just another fabric of the divine. Like, it's just another qualitative experience that is so profoundly made that we believe it. Like, I believed it was unbearable, or I believed it was excruciating, and it is. But unbearable is, like, if how do I say this? If identity can release itself from believing it in that way, and that's where the surrendering comes in, then it just becomes another sound, another vibration, another fabric, another art supply of the divine. And in that surrendering, then I popped into profound compassion for people that do kill themselves, a profound understanding of why that looks like it's the only choice, and also a profound understanding that that it's also a huge loss in a way, if that's chosen, right? It's like, to surrender through it then reveals the magnificence that's carrying one along through the experience all the way.
Yeah, when people say it's a common thing, I hear when someone ends their life, people will say, "I don't understand how anyone could do that," and
Right.
I feel I am blessed to have a greater compassion because I can understand why people would get stuck in that and ultimately choose to end their life that way. And I think
Right.
it's a common thing. It's a common thing. I mean, the suicide rates have been rising in most Western countries for a long time, and so the more open we can be about this sort of structure of consciousness, as you put it there, or this aspect of the divine,
Hmm.
what actually happens there, how it creates that degree of tension. I think most mental health services, certainly in the UK, the ones that I'm familiar with, have a fairly limited insight into the nature of mind and the nature of what the human being is. I mean, to state the obvious, to consider the human being just as a physical being is usually the starting point for so much treatment that people will get. It's really exciting to see the growth of a lot of the more integral depth psychology, and the spiritual emergence network is growing. This idea of the spiritual emergency, this term I'm sure you're familiar, that Stan and Christina Groff termed, that these times of great stress or breakdown, can be viewed more helpfully as something breaking forth, something
Right.
emerging. So it seems a really helpful thing to go to these places, to get these qualifications, to go into the darkness and find our way out, in order that we can be helpful to others on their own journeys.
Hmm. Yeah, I had the similar thing of having that compassion for understanding, that place of understanding. And yeah, I mean, I agree in that the spiritual emergency is happening everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm seeing that it's like, and a lot of people are speaking about this in terms of the whole frequency of human consciousness is being raised, and what isn't in that higher frequency then gets revealed. And so the intensities that are coming up for people, I'll often like congratulate people when they like present me with some really uncomfortable thing that's going on that they're really frustrated about, or it's so intense. Like I get excited because, ooh, great. Like the harder it is, the greater the breakthrough, right? Of like, ooh, great, you're close,
Uh-huh.
right? Like stay with it, and that surrendering for me through my own process. Someone had asked me years ago, like, if it got easier, and in doing the surrendering. And what I said was it actually became more familiar.
Mm-hmm.
So it became easier because it was more familiar, but then more challenging things start to surface because
Mm-hmm.
the system was then ready to handle the more challenging ones.
Yep.
But so it was both a yes and a no to
Mm-hmm.
that question. But the other sort of byproduct from all those experiences is then the excitement when something really challenging comes up,
Yeah.
because it's going to be really good.
Uh-huh.
So
It's like the computer game when you get to level 10 or level 12. Is it easier? Well, no, it's more difficult than the other levels, but you're by that point quite good at playing the game, so you might get through it on the first attempt. I think it was with Karen the other day, we were having a conversation, and we had this analogy came up that also it's like the computer game in that it saves where you're at. So if the big monster eats you before you can chop off its head or whatever, then it's okay because you get to start again. I certainly have seen that in my own repeating the same lessons and going through the same challenges more times than I might have thought were necessary, but clearly were necessary precisely that number of times, you know, to
Right. And this actually relates back to the multidimensional piece, because in seeing all these different layers, then you can see where someone is at in terms of that, like as you're saying, where they are on the game board. Like I'll use that analogy all the time of this multidimensional reality is just a series of game boards, and that there's a sense of self, an individualized sense of self on each dimension, but that sense of self individually is also not separate from the whole plane, so that individualness can then open up and surrender through its container of the individualness into the whole plane. So when someone opens up through that here on the earth, then they feel themselves in oneness, because that sense of self busted through that plane and that container, and then opens up, and that on each of these dimensions or planes or realms, I don't know what language to use, it's the same thing. And so that there's a sense of self that's individualized, individualized nature, that's also still unified, that has the information or is it's like karma, right? It keeps track of all of that learning, both the learning that hasn't happened and the learning that has happened. So all that wisdom and brilliance, and then the places of unfolding and learning are all present in those layers. So I'm hesitant to use the word scorecard or like keeping track, because the human mind then goes to judgment and failing and who's ahead and did I screw up. So I'm trying to avoid that language, because it's more in this gorgeous, brilliant, loving design. It's a totally brilliant, loving design, and there's choice that happens in these higher realms of this gorgeous unfolding. But yes, in the video game, right, the monster chops your head off and you're like, oh shit, I died, you know? And it's like the soul might do that too. Oh shit, I died in that one. Okay, next. Right, next. Let's do that again. That was fun, you know? And I'm gonna get that dragon next time, you know, or like in that divine embodiment. So this is, I don't know, I just want to say one more thing of that. Like, this is where I get excited, right? Of like in that full surrendering, when you're not afraid of dying, when you know everything's made up, when you're willing to be everything, then you can be the divine thing. You can be the bad guy. You can be the good guy. You are everything, just unfolding itself, playing out this amazing miracle of existence. So there's a freedom in that. There's a freedom of being in the game of like, oh, you got me, you know, oh, you know, that's the whole the whole thing.
Yeah, I think the game metaphor, when it avoids the scorecard element, as you're saying there, or the idea of failure, the play of this is a wonderful metaphor to bring into especially spiritual discourse, because it can often get a little bit intense and serious, and we have the echoes of organized religion and so on, where it's deadly serious. And I like this, you know, who am I going to play at being today? What fun is life going to have with me? What fun is spirit going to have with me? It feels like we've reached that point.
It does.
I'm going to be heading off to bed soon, and you've got a wonderful day ahead of you in gorgeous Kauai. I think, however Hawaiian my curtains may or may not be, you've got the real thing, which is great.
Oh, magical tea leaves behind there. Yep.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kristin. It's been a real joy. I appreciate you giving your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a total delight. Total delight speaking with you too.
Blessings.
Yeah, blessings to you.